Good morning, students. In the previous session, we have discussed about perception and paradigms in a special way. Today, we are going to discuss about the details of perception. Initially, we will begin the session by some exercises. And after completing those exercises, we will try to understand what is perception, the factors influencing perception, and as human beings, we make judgments on the basis of our perception. So finally, in the last part, we will be discussing various shortcuts normally we use in judging others. Let us enter into the details.
What do you see here? Are you able to see two different pictures? Please read it. Read it loudly. Macadam, macaroni, McTavish, McDonald. Continue. Here we see two pictures. Which black circle is larger? Is it the left black circle or the black circle in the right side? So let's come to the perception process. Here we are able to see two pictures. If we perceive or if we look at the white background, we can see the picture of a chalice. And if you are able to perceive the black or the colored portion, we can see that two persons are looking each other. They are having a face-to-face gaze, we can say. So, where in the beginning you are able to see both these pictures. So how did you read this? Was it turn off the engine, or was it correctly read as turn off the engine? Because two the are given here. But normally we have a tendency, due to our experience or learning or past interaction with these kind of words, to read it as turn off the engine. And while reading this, how did you read each word? Macadam, macaroni, McTavish, McDonald, Macbeth, and machinery. Some people may read it as machinery because all the previous 5 words were initially being pronounced as Mac. So we were also conditioned to read the last word as machinery. So evaluate, how did you or how could you read that, the last word, machinery? And this was another exercise. And here we know that both black circles are same in size. There is no difference between these two black circles. But normally we have a tendency to perceive the right back black circle as larger, and that is only because of the surrounding circles. In the right one, the surrounding circles were of the same size, but in left, the surrounding circles were larger. And when something is a smaller one is placed or kept along with larger one, we have a tendency to perceive that as smaller than the actual size. But here both the black circles are same in size. Try to read this. There are two words. Try it. And each word has 3 letters. What do you see? Is it words or something else? Some of you could read this, even at least the some letters or some words. Now look at this. It is fly tie, and the same is written in the previous slide. Fly tie. Now look at the white letters. White. Perceive the white. And on the basis of that, now again look at this. Are you able to see F L Y T I E? Normally people can easily perceive the letter Y and the entire T I E, but L also to some extent. But it is very difficult to see the word, see the letter F. So why these objects or pictures were perceived differently? Why different interpretation came? And the reasons are, one is the figure ground. In the first one, the picture of a chalice and two people. Where are you looking at? Are you looking at the figure or are you looking at the ground or background? And the another interpretation or reason for that, certain things are against our learning. Turn off the engine. But we have learned to read it as turn off the engine. We know that normally the correct arrangements of words are as turn off the engine. So we may omit the repeated the from the reading. And the second one, the words macadam, macaroni, Macbeth, finally missionary. So while reading or as we proceed with the 5 words in similar way, we have a tendency to perceive the 6th one also as the previous one. It's called conditioning. As a result of repeated exposure, we may behave in a particular way without knowing. So conditioning caused the misinterpretation. And in the case of the circle, black circle, it is the environment or the surroundings that makes a difference. And finally, in the fly tie, learning related to background. Normally we read black letters on white background. And when white letters on white background is presented before us, we may find some difficulty in reading it. So all these are related to perception. And let's see, here we see the picture. We have 5 senses. And through the senses, we get input. and those inputs are processed, and that processing of inputs received through sensation is called processing. So perception is a process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions in order to give meaning to their environment. So perception is a process of organizing and interpreting the sensory inputs or sensory impressions. And through the perception, we give meaning to our environment. We may see some objects through our sensation or through our eye, or we may hear some word through the ears. So we collect data through our five senses. But those sensory inputs are interpreted through the process called perception, and that takes place in the brain. So sometimes a piece of coir can be misunderstood as a snake. Surely surrounding may have an effect on that, but we see something maybe in slight darkness and we may misinterpret that as a snake. So perception is a process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions in order to give meaning to their environment. And why is perception is very important? The picture shown here is written like this: your perception creates your reality. Is very true. Your perception creates your reality. That means we believe something as real on our perception, based on our perception. And that reality, our reality may not be the true reality. So perception is very important because people's behavior is based on their perception of what reality is, not on reality itself. Sometimes the true reality, actual reality may be different from my personal reality, but I behave according to my reality, not the actual reality. So when we work in an organization, we have to understand that people behave based on their perception. So it is very important in an organization. The next point, the world as it is perceived is a world that is behaviorally important. The world as it is perceived, not as it is really, is more important in a behavioral context. As in the previous point, an individual may be behaving on the basis of his or her perception of reality. So it is very important in a behavioral perspective. And why we study perceptions? What is the importance of studying perception? The reasons are, we study this topic to better understand how people make attributions about events. So the word attribution, how they try to explain it, their explanations of events are based on their perception. So the study of perception will help us to better understand the attributions that people make about events. We don't see reality. We interpret what we see and call it reality. It is very important. Sometimes we may not be seeing the true picture, the reality. We see something and we call it reality and we behave according to our interpretation of reality. Another very famous quotation is, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. That means our perception of the world is very important. We are not perceiving the world as it is. Rather, we look at the world through our unique lens, our unique perception. And the attribution process guides our behavior regardless of the truth of the attribution. In the first point, we said we make attributions about events on the basis of our perception. And those attribution processes guides our behavior. We are not much concerned about the truth of the attribution, rather we are guided by the attribution and we behave according to our attribution process. The next is factors influencing perception. There are three factors that influences the perception process. One is the perceiver, that is the person who perceives, the perceiver. And the second one is the target, that is object or object of being perceived, object that is being perceived, that is called the target. And the third one is the situation. So these three factors influence the perception process of an individual. Let us see these factors in detail. Factors in the perceiver: attitudes, motives, interests, experience, expectations. Factors in the target: novelty, motion, sounds, size, background, proximity. And factors in the situation: time, work setting, social setting. So all these three factors contribute to the perception process. So factors in the perceiver, they are the factors that is very personal to the perceiver, the attitude of the person. Sometimes if we are very negative towards a person, and when we look at the person we may be seeing only the negatives, because our attitude influences our perceptions. Normally we say that there are proofreaders in printing media, and the task of the person is to find out faults, mistakes, and he may be looking at with that kind of an attitude. He want to find out mistakes and corrections. So he may not be looking or perceiving the correct words, but mistakes are always identified. So the attitude, the motives. What is the motive? For example, if you are looking to buy something, always a product similar to that may be catching our attention. So our motives, our interests. For example, person who is very interested in sports may be finding sports news very clearly in newspapers. But another person who is least bothered about sports may not be perceiving those news related to sports, though he goes through the paper. And the other one is the experience. A person who has gone through some kind of experience may perceive similar situation, similar experience very easily. So the experience of the perceiver influences the perception process. The other one is expectations. When we expect something, we may easily perceive such events. So the five factors in the perceiver, such as attitudes, motives, interests, experience, and expectations, influences the perception process. And the second set of factors influencing the perception is the factors in the target. I already mentioned that target is the object that is being perceived. If there is some novelty, newness in a particular object, easily that may be perceived. Novelty, newness may be perceived very easily. And the other one is motion. We may perceive a moving object very easily than a stationary object. So motion leads to enhanced perception. And sounds. When sound is there, that may be easily perceived. That's why for advertisement and all, the background or jingles are very important. So sounds catches the attention of individuals. And the size, especially a, a contradiction or a contrast, when something bigger is kept with small ones, that bigger object may be perceived easily. Or a very small one is kept along with large sized objects, that smaller one, which is different in size, may be perceived. And the other factor in the target is the background. The background influences our perception process. We have seen the exercises in the beginning. So there the background created or influenced our perception process. And the other one is proximity. Proximity means nearness. Nearby objects may be perceived easily than a very far away object. So the proximity or nearness influences the perception process, and that nearness of the object, it is a factor related to the target. So there are six factors in the target. They are novelty, motion, sounds, size, background, and proximity. And after the factors in the perceiver and the target, the third factor that influences perception is the factors in the situation. The situation also places a very crucial role. The factors in the situation are time. What is the time? Sometimes when we are very tired, we may not perceive certain things. Normally, when it is a time to go, when regular classes are there, the hour just before the lunch, when we are really hungry, we may not hear certain things that the teacher tells. So the time is important. And the work setting or the social setting. Work setting means what is a working environment. That also influences the perception process. And the social setting, the company of friends, when we are talking to someone else, we may not listen to certain other things that are being told to us. So the social setting. So these are the three factors in the situation: time, work setting, and social setting. So altogether there are 14 factors. 5 factors are related to the perceiver, and 6 factors are related to the target, and 3 factors are related to the situation. So the factors in the perceiver, factors in the target, and factors in the situation influences the perception process. And the next one is perception and judgment. the attribution theory. So here we make judgments on the basis of our perception, and we may interpret what we see, and that is called the attribution. What we give as an interpretation. So the attribution theory says when individuals observe behavior, they attempt to determine whether it is internally or externally caused. I shall explain this. That means when we observe the behavior of another person, we will think whether the particular behavior is internal to that particular individual. That means something that came from his own, or the behavior is a result of the external environment. He reacted or behaved because of the external environment, or whether he was primarily motivated internally. So normally we try to determine whether the behavior is externally caused or internally caused. And while making the attribution, we commit a fundamental attribution error. And what is that fundamental attribution error? It is a tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors when making judgments about the behavior of others. What is that? There are two factors as we said earlier. One is external factors and the other one is internal factors. And here the context is that we are judging another person. We are making judgment about the behavior of others. For example, a student fails in a paper. He is not studying well. So normally we may, as a teacher, I may say that it is because he is too lazy. He is not properly attending the classes, or he is not interested in studies. All those are internal factors. It is his problem. And I underestimate the external factors, such as maybe his financial situation is poor, or sometimes he is unable to follow my teaching. So all those external factors are underestimated. That is not given much importance. Rather, what is highlighted or what is given more focus is his internal factors. And this is when we make judgments about the behavior of others, and that is an error. That is called a fundamental attribution error. So what is fundamental attribution error? I shall explain it once again. So when we judge others or the behavior of others, we have a tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors, and we have a tendency to overestimate the influence of internal factors. And the other one is self-serving bias. And it is a tendency of individuals to attribute their own successes to internal factors while putting the blame for failures on external factors. So here, every individual has this tendency. And what is the tendency? When the individual has a success, he may attribute his success to internal factors. And when he has a failure, he does the opposite. He may blame the external factors. For example, a student gets very good mark in examination. That is a success. He may say, I worked hard. I woke up very early in the morning and I studied well. I prepared notes. I was very hardworking. That's why I got this mark. And when he fails, he may blame the external factors. He may blame the teachers. the teacher didn't teach me well. He was very lazy in teaching, and the college was not offering an appropriate environment for learning. So all those, the university put questions out of syllabus. So questions were really very bad. So all those reasons led to my failure. See, if success, I'm the person responsible for that. If I fail, someone else is responsible. So that is called self-serving bias. And while judging others, we use certain shortcuts. Let's see those shortcuts in detail. The first shortcut is called selective perception. Selective perception. So here people selectively interpret what they see on the basis of their interest, background, experience and attitudes. So here everything is not perceived by the person. Rather he may perceive or may pay attention to things that are very interested to him or something that correlates with his experiences or attitudes or background. So those things are perceived, others are not perceived. For example, when if we are discussing something about tour in our class, everyone catches that. But when something is very serious is taught in the class, normally many people do not think that they had come across such a discussion in the class. So we perceive things that are on the basis of our interest, background, experience and attitudes. So that is called selective perception. And the other one is called halo effect. Halo effect is drawing a general impression about an individual on the basis of a single characteristic. I may judge a person only on the basis of a single characteristic. I don't consider the other things. For example, a student who comes late to the class, on the basis of that late coming, I may say that he is very irresponsible student. I have only one reason to say that he is not regular. So on the basis of that, I make a general impression about that individual. And the other one is contrast effect. And contrast effect is the process of making evaluations of a person's characteristics that are affected by comparisons with other people recently encountered who rank higher or lower in the same characteristic. So what happens here? Here, I may judge an individual on the basis of the characteristic that I saw very recently in some other individuals. For example, when you go for an interview, if you are the second person, normally your performance may be evaluated with that of the first person who attended it. When the first person's interview was very superb and you did not score up to that, you may be considered low in performance. And when the first person was very poor in his performance, even though you have the same performance as in the previous situation, previous level, you may be considered as a person with high performance. So you are always compared with the other person recently acquired. So that is called contrast effect. And the other one is called projection. Projection is attributing one's own characteristics to other people. An individual may have a tendency to attribute his own characteristics to other people. I may attribute certain weaknesses I have on someone else. So that is called projection. And the other one is called stereotyping. Stereotyping, judging someone on the basis of one's perception of the group to which that person belongs. We may judge a person on the basis of the group to which that particular person belongs. We may not look at the quality or the merit of that individual, rather to which group he belongs. And based on my perception of that particular group, I may judge a person. If I have a negative perception about the group to which that person belongs, I may perceive him negatively. Even though he is not very good in my opinion, the group to which he belongs is very positive. I may judge a person also as positive. So such a judging is called stereotyping. So these are some of the elements related to perception and judgment. Thank you.